At the second stop of our cruise, my son smiled, patted me on the shoulder, and said, "Dad, go buy yourself a souvenir. We'll wait right here." 20 minutes later, I returned carrying a small music box and froze. The ship was already pulling away from the dock. My passport, wallet, medication, and luggage were all on board. High above on the railing, I saw my son holding up my briefcase like a trophy. I stood there alone watching them celebrate. But 5 days later, when they turned on the national news, they nearly collapsed. I am grateful deeply that you chose to spend your time here. Now I want to hear from you. Where in the world are you right now, city, country, even just a continent? Tell me below. One thing worth knowing. Some details in this story are fictionalized for storytelling purposes. The names and situations are constructed, but the wisdom at the heart of it is yours to take. I will start this story from the exact moment everything began, 9:45 in the morning, Wednesday, September 17th, 2025. I was standing inside a small souvenir shop at Charlotte Amalie Port St. Thomas, holding a hand-carved wooden music box, shaped like a cruise ship, asking the vendor how much it cost when the ship's horn sounded. One long, heavy blast, the kind that doesn't negotiate. I turned toward the dock. 200 meters away, the boarding bridge of the Atlantic Sovereign was already retracting, steel grinding against steel, the sound eaten by the warm Caribbean wind. The white hull of that enormous vessel had begun pulling away from the pier, slow and certain, the way a verdict moves once it has already been delivered. The vendor, a round-faced local man in his 50s wearing a faded blue shirt, looked at me, then looked at the ship, then looked back at me. His eyes went wide and his voice shot up half an octave. Sir, that's your ship. You have to run. You have to go right now." "How much for the box?" I asked. "What?" "The music box." I set it on the counter and reached into my breast pocket. "You were saying $18. His mouth opened and closed like a man trying to choose between two emergencies. "Sir, your ship is literally leaving the dock right now." "I can see that," I said, and I smiled at him, the slow, calm smile of a man who is watching something he already knew was going to happen. $18. Here's 20. Keep the change. His hands shook when he counted it. Mine did not move at all. I walked out of that shop at 9:47, music box under my arm, and stepped to the edge of the dock. The Atlantic Sovereign was moving maybe 30 feet of open water between her hull and the pier, already growing wider by the second. I looked up. Deck 12. There was my son, Dion Cole, 43 years old, acting CEO of Cole Logistics, the man I had spent 2 decades turning into something worth inheriting. He was standing at the railing with a champagne flute in his left hand, and my brown leather briefcase raised in his right, held up like a trophy, like a man crossing a finish line he had been training toward his entire adult life. Even from 200 meters away, I could see the grin on his face. Inside that briefcase, my primary passport, my wallet, a prescription bottle bearing the label of my heart medication. Standing beside him was Alara, his wife, 38 years old, sharp as filed glass. She was not smiling. Alara never smiles when she is genuinely satisfied. That was something I had understood about her within 3 months of her entering this family. Real satisfaction for Alara lives behind the eyes, not on the mouth. I stood on that dock and looked at my son. I did not shout. I did not wave. I did not run. I let him see me there, completely still, the ocean wind pressing flat against my linen jacket, and I let him have his moment. The moment he had been rehearsing, I would later confirm for 14 months. Then I let my shoulders drop forward. I let my knees soften. I let my eyes go glassy, the specific kind of glassy that reads on a security camera as an elderly man sliding into shock. The Port Authority officer reached me before 10 o'clock. Young man, early 30s, careful voice, someone trained to handle distressed tourists before they became paperwork. Sir, are you all right? Can you tell me your name?" My hands trembled around the music box. My chin moved in small, helpless increments. I patted my jacket pockets empty, 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 and looked up at him with the eyes of a man who no longer remembered what city he was standing in. Robert. My voice cracked on that name, cracked beautifully, the way old wood splits along a fault line you have prepared in advance. Robert, is that you? Where did your mother go? She was just here. She was right beside me. She was... Sir, it's okay. He took my arm gently. My name is Officer Caldwell. Let's get you somewhere to sit down. He guided me inside the terminal, fluorescent lights, plastic chairs bolted to the floor, the smell of industrial cleaner layered over salt air. He brought me a paper cup of water and crouched down in front of me, his radio crackling softly at his hip. It was approximately 10 past 10 in the morning. I held that cup in both hands and let the water tremble over the rim in small, pitiful waves. Not enough to spill completely, just enough. Security cameras are not sophisticated audiences. They only require consistency. My bag, I murmured, pressing one shaking hand against my empty chest. My son, he said he would wait for me at the dock. He promised. He said 10 minutes, he said. We're going to figure this out, sir, I promise. Officer Caldwell turned to speak into his radio, his back half-angled away. In that window, 4 seconds, maybe 5, I straightened my spine entirely. CEO posture. The posture of a man who has presided over board meetings, hostile acquisitions, and federal audits for 31 years, without once letting his back touch a chair. I looked directly at the security camera mounted above the terminal door. I gave it one deliberate nod. Then Caldwell's boots turned back toward me, and my shoulders curved forward again, and I was trembling, and I was lost, and I was just a confused old man whose family had sailed away and left him at a port he couldn't name. I sat in that chair for exactly 25 minutes, from 10 past 10 until 35 past 10, Wednesday, September 17th, 2025. 25 minutes is not a number I chose because it felt right. I chose it because I had calculated it. At the Atlantic Sovereign's standard departure speed, 25 minutes is the time required for the vessel to cross from U.S. territorial waters into open international jurisdiction, the precise point at which what Dion had done could no longer be undone with a quiet phone call between attorneys. At 10:35, I reached into the inner lining of my jacket and removed a satellite phone, the one item that had never been inside that brown leather briefcase because I had never intended it to be there. I typed 4 words to Marcus Webb. They took the bait. Then I set the phone on my knee and looked out the terminal window at the noon light burning white across the Caribbean harbor. That was when I noticed the music box still under my arm. I had carried it out of the shop without thinking, or perhaps thinking in a way I hadn't fully recognized yet. I found the small brass key on the underside and wound it twice. 8 notes, simple, repeating. My chest caved in so fast it felt like someone had reached between my ribs and closed a fist around everything inside. I knew that melody. Margaret hummed it every Sunday morning in the kitchen, while the coffee brewed, not singing the words, just the notes, low and private, like the song was something she kept only for herself. I had heard it so many times in 40 years of marriage that I had completely stopped hearing it. The way you stop hearing the house you live in. My eyes burned hot. My throat locked shut. I pressed my lips together and stared hard at the water-stained ceiling until the wave of it passed, or at least moved somewhere I could contain it. Then I closed the music box, looked back out at the harbor. Dion believed he had just cut himself free from my shadow. He had no idea that shadow had been engineered, measured, calibrated, and deliberately cast to fall on him at exactly this moment, on exactly this morning, at exactly this port. But before I tell you what happened next, you need to understand how I knew this day was coming, and why I had spent more than 2 years making sure I was ready for it. 72 hours before I stood at that port, with a music box and a satellite phone. It was Sunday evening, September 14th, 2025. I was sitting at the head of my dining room table in the Cole estate in Savannah, Georgia, watching two people plan to bury me alive and smiling at them over candlelight. Margaret designed that dining room. She chose the long oak table, the cream-colored walls, the brass chandelier that softened every light it touched. She believed a beautiful room could civilize almost any conversation. She was wrong about that. But I never had the heart to tell her so. There were 3 of us at the table that night. My chef Dominic had prepared sea bass and opened a Côte du Rhône that cost more than most people's car payments. Dion was to my left, his second glass already half gone by 7:45. Ilara sat across from him cutting her food with the precise, unhurried movements of someone who has never eaten a single meal without calculating something. I watched them the way you watch weather, not afraid of it, just tracking it, noting the pressure changes. At 7:53, Dion set down his glass. "You know what your problem is, Dad?" His voice was conversational, almost fond. The way cruelty sounds when it finally stops pretending to be something else. "Look at that suit. It smells like the 90s. Not just the fabric, the whole way you carry yourself. You walk into a room and you still expect everyone to stop moving because you walked in." He picked up his fork again, gesturing loosely in my direction. "That era is done. That era has been done for a long time." My chest squeezed. Not from fear, from something older and heavier than fear. Something that lives in the specific place where a father keeps his hope for his children. "The company needs someone who actually knows how to count money in this decade," Dion continued. "Not someone who built something 40 years ago and has been coasting on the legend ever since. You built the floor, Dad. Fine, I'll give you that. But I'm about to build the ceiling, and I don't need you standing there telling me how high ceilings are supposed to go." I set my fork carefully against the edge of my plate. I lifted my water glass. I looked at my son. His eyes met mine for 2 full seconds. Then he looked away the same way he had looked away from me since he was 9 years old and caught in a lie he couldn't talk himself out of. Dion has never been able to hold my gaze. He got something from his mother in that, except Margaret always looked away because she was too tender for confrontation. Dion looks away because some part of him underneath all of it is afraid. "Don't look at me like that," he said, his jaw tightening. "That look, like I just insulted your farm, like I don't understand what real work is." His voice rose just slightly, the way voices rise when the wine and the resentment finally stop fighting each other. "Built by your own hands, that's what you always say, isn't it? Every single time. All built by your own hands." He set his glass down hard enough that the wine moved. "That's not a legacy. That's a story you've been telling yourself for so long, you've forgotten it's just a story. You were in the right place at the right time with the right amount of stubbornness. That's not a legacy. That's luck with good PR." Something stung at the corners of my eyes. I breathed through it. Then Ilara set down her fork with a small deliberate click, the sound of a gavel almost. "Leland." Her voice was smooth and completely without warmth, the way certain expensive knives are smooth. "Please stop performing the patient father. It doesn't suit you, and it wastes everyone's time at this table." She reached for her wine, turning the stem between 2 fingers. "I didn't marry into this family for the history lessons or the sentiment. I married into it because there is a future here that you are currently blocking. The way old furniture blocks a room, nobody wants to rearrange it, because nobody wants to admit the room looked better before it was filled." I stood up. I folded my napkin into a clean rectangle and set it beside my plate. "I'm tired," I said pleasantly. "Good night." I walked to my bedroom and closed the door behind me. Then I sat on the edge of the bed in the dark and put in my earpiece. The microphone was inside the orchid arrangement at the center of the dining table. I had placed it there myself 4 days prior. The audio came through clean and close. I could hear the clink of Dion refilling his glass, could hear Alara's measured exhale. Then her voice dropped into something lower. Private. He's deteriorating faster than we planned. The performance on the boat will look natural. Dr. Harmon's assessment goes in October. The competency filing follows in November. By December, the board has no mechanism to challenge the transfer. Dion and the 50 million, Alara. Already structured through the Cayman entity. Once the declaration clears, it moves automatically. Nobody can touch it. A pause. Then Alara again, and her voice shifted into something I can only describe as satisfied, in the way a locked door is satisfied. His wife died at exactly the right time, honestly. If Margaret were still alive, she would have seen all of this coming from the very beginning and made it completely impossible. She always had better instincts than he does. Better instincts than either of us, probably. My hands clamped around the edge of the nightstand so hard that the wood creaked. My vision blurred at the edges. My throat closed completely, and I sat there in the dark, with Margaret's name hanging in that earpiece like something that had just been struck and left to ring. Margaret, who designed this dining room, who hummed songs in the kitchen on Sunday mornings, who loved this family with a patience and a ferocity that none of us had ever deserved. I sat in the dark for a long time, maybe 10 minutes, maybe 20. Then I opened the nightstand drawer and I breathed. Secondary passport sealed inside the right heel of my Oxford shoe, custom-fitted compartment, undetectable without removal of the inner sole. One credit card registered to a Delaware LLC. One recording watch, 72-hour capacity running since Friday the 12th. And on the chair by the window, the brown leather briefcase packed with my primary passport, my wallet, and a prescription bottle wearing the correct label and containing nothing but 500 milligrams of vitamin C per capsule. Everything in its place. Everything exactly as planned. At 8:41 on Sunday night, September 14th, 2025, I typed one message to Marcus Webb, final phase. Begin. Then I lay down in the dark and did not sleep. 48 hours later, on the morning of Monday, September 15th, I was aboard the Atlantic Sovereign, sitting beside Dr. Evelyn Cross at an upper-deck lunch table. She was 67 years old, silver-haired, with the composed stillness of someone who has spent decades in federal courtrooms and learned to make every single word carry its full weight and then some. We talked about the color of the Caribbean water in September and whether the forecast called for wind. At the end of the meal, I said one thing that had nothing to do with the weather. St. Thomas, Wednesday. Dr. Cross looked out at the horizon for a moment. Then she nodded once clean the way people nod when they agreed to something long before the conversation happened. I picked up my coffee. My hand was steady as a surveyor's level. I had boarded that ship not as a man going on vacation. I had boarded it as a man walking onto a stage he had personally designed, built and lit, the difference being that no one else in the cast had read the real script. And while Dion was somewhere below deck running his final checklist, I was already 3 moves ahead, thinking about the one thing he had never once considered looking for. While I was sitting inside the St. Thomas Port Terminal on the morning of Wednesday, September 17th, 2025, shaking a paper cup of water and calling a port officer, Robert, the Atlantic Sovereign, was already cutting south through the Caribbean, heading for Nassau. And inside cabin 1204 on deck 12, Alara was opening my brown leather briefcase on the white linen bedspread. I want to be precise about something here because the sequence matters. My performance at the terminal, the trembling hands, the glassy eyes, the name Robert, had nothing to do with the medication. I did not know at 9:47 that morning what Alara would do with the briefcase. I did not need to know. The performance was built on what had already happened. I had been left on a dock, without identification, without financial access, without any instrument that would allow me to make sense as a legal adult in a foreign port. That was sufficient. That was the entire architecture of what I was performing. The medication swap came later, 11:17 ship time, and I learned about it 3 days after when Marcus sent the footage. I include it here out of strict chronology because it belongs to the same chapter of what they intended. The terminal and the cabin were two halves of one plan. I am telling you both halves together so you understand the whole shape of it. What I'm about to tell you I did not witness in real time. 3 days later, Marcus Webb sent me a video file footage pulled from the camera system inside that cabin. Dion had ordered a surveillance camera installed in the ship's corridor outside my cabin to monitor my movements during the voyage. What he didn't know was that Marcus had rerouted the installation order. The camera that was actually placed captured the interior of Dion's own cabin, 1204, not mine. The technician who did the work reported only to Marcus. The footage was time-stamped 11:17 in the morning. Alara moved through that cabin the way she moved through everything. No hesitation, no wasted motion, no trembling hands. She lifted my briefcase onto the bed, clicked it open, and began sorting through the contents with the calm efficiency of someone completing a task they have rehearsed many times. She pulled out the prescription bottle, the one bearing the label of my cardiac medication, held it up to the window light, and read the label slowly. Then she nodded to herself, the way you nod when something confirms what you already knew. Dion was standing near the window with a fresh glass of champagne, looking out toward the fading coastline of St. Thomas. He hadn't touched the briefcase. That part was always going to be Alara's work. She understood that certain things require a steady hand, and Dion's hands have never been steady when the stakes are real. "It's the right bottle," Alara said, not looking up. "Same manufacturer, same dosage. He's been taking it every morning with breakfast. So he won't notice the difference," Dion said. "He'll notice nothing," she replied. "That's the entire point." She reached into the nightstand drawer and removed a second bottle, identical in size, identical in label design, the kind of counterfeit precision that costs money and requires connections that most people don't have and aren't supposed to. Inside that bottle was a pharmaceutical compound, not poison, nothing dramatic, nothing that would show up immediately. Just a slow, steady chemical erosion of cognitive clarity. The kind of thing that, administered consistently over 60 to 90 days, produces symptoms indistinguishable from early-stage dementia in a man of 70. She swapped the two bottles. The original went into her personal bag. The new one went into my briefcase. Dion watched her do it. He didn't say anything. He just took another sip of champagne the way a man drinks when he is celebrating something he hasn't fully earned yet, but fully intends to. I stopped my narration there for a moment, because I want you to understand something clearly. I had known about that bottle since July. Marcus sent me a photograph on the 14th of July, 2025. A screenshot of a private pharmacy order placed from a Delaware address registered to a shell entity tied to Alara's family trust. I had the compound analyzed by a pharmacologist at Emory University who confirmed what it was and what it was designed to do. I swapped the bottle in my briefcase before I stepped onto the Atlantic Sovereign. What Alara placed back into my bag on the morning of September 17th was a bottle of pure vitamin C 500 milligrams per capsule, completely harmless, purchased by me from a CVS in Savannah 3 days prior. But here is what I chose not to stop. Over the 6 months prior to that morning, Alara had accessed my medication cabinet in the Cole estate 8 separate times. Each visit was captured on camera, the angle, the duration, the specific bottles she handled. 8 visits. 8 pieces of evidence she built for herself without knowing she was building them. I could have changed the cabinet lock after the first visit. Instead, I let her keep coming back. Every time she opened that cabinet, she was laying another brick in the wall of her own prison. On screen, Dion finally turned from the window. He set his champagne glass on the dresser and looked out toward the horizon, toward the direction of St. Thomas, already nothing but a smudge of green and pale blue in the distance. "You know what I keep thinking," he said, his voice dropping into something harder and more private. "Leave him there. Leave him at that port. An old man with no ID, no money, no medication. It reads as a tragic travel accident. A man his age, his heart condition, nobody asks hard questions about a tourist who doesn't make it back to the ship. Elara turned to look at her husband. She did not flinch, did not protest, did not soften. She looked at him the way you look at a business proposal that has just been articulated to your satisfaction. Then we let it read that way, she said. That was all. One sentence. No raised voice, no dramatic pause. Just the flat transactional confirmation of two people who had decided somewhere along the way that I was a liability to be resolved rather than a father to be considered. My throat tightened when I watched that part of the footage. Not from surprise, I had stopped being surprised by either of them a long time ago. But there is a specific kind of pain that lives in watching someone look at you as an inconvenience, especially when that someone is your blood. At 11:42, Elara opened her laptop and typed an email to Victor Haynes. Phase 1 complete. Prepare the medical documents. We need the incompetency filing ready by Friday. Dion leaned over her shoulder and read it. He straightened up and nodded once. What neither of them knew, what I had made absolutely certain neither of them would know, was that Victor Haynes had received a different kind of communication the night before the ship departed. Not an email, a phone call. From me. I stopped the video there. Not because I couldn't watch more, but because I had work to do and the person I needed to see was not on that ship. He was waiting for me in Nassau, in an unmarked office on the 3rd floor of an old building overlooking the harbor. I left the St. Thomas Port Terminal at 1 o'clock in the afternoon on Wednesday, September 17, 2025. Not by taxi, not by any vehicle that would appear on a dispatch record. A small private boat was waiting at the rear dock in the one blind spot I had identified on the port's camera grid 3 weeks earlier during a site visit I had logged as a leisure trip. The man at the wheel did not ask my name. I did not ask his. We understood each other the way professionals understand each other, through the precise courtesy of not requiring explanations. The crossing from St. Thomas to Nassau took just under 4 hours. I spent most of it on the stern bench watching the water, feeling the engine vibration, move through the soles of my shoes, and thinking about Margaret. About the music box. About the way certain songs stay inside a person long after the person who taught them to you has gone. By 5:15 in the afternoon, Nassau Harbor was in front of me, golden in the early evening light, the kind of tropical beauty that seems almost impolite given the circumstances. The office was on the 3rd floor of a sand-colored building on East Bay Street, 2 blocks from the financial district. No signage. A plain door with a keypad. I entered the 6-digit code that Marcus and I had established 18 months ago and took the stairs. Marcus Webb was standing when I pushed the door open. He was 45 years old, medium build, with the kind of face that people consistently underestimate. And that was precisely why I had chosen him 23 years ago as the one person inside coal logistics who would always know more than anyone else knew he knew. He crossed the room and we shook hands. Not the handshake of a boss and an employee. The handshake of 2 men who have kept the same secret for a very long time and are finally standing on the other side of it. You look like you just spent 4 hours on a fishing boat, Marcus said. I spent 4 hours on a fishing boat, I said. What's the situation? He turned back to the desk, 2 monitors, a satellite uplink router, a thick manila folder, and a coffee that was still steaming. He gestured for me to sit. Dion activated the Emergency Executive Authority Clause at 11:50 this morning, Marcus said, pulling up a document on the left screen. He filed it with the Atlanta office, citing your medical disappearance as grounds. The board hasn't pushed back yet. They don't know what's real and what isn't. They will, I said. Keep going. Victor Haynes received the email from Elara at 11:42 this morning. He hasn't responded yet. He's been sitting on it for... Marcus checked his watch, about 5 hours. He'll sit on it until I tell him otherwise, I said. What else? Marcus opened the manila folder and placed a single printed page in front of me. My eyes moved down the numbers. The transfer, I said. $47 million, Marcus confirmed. Routed from the Emergency Reserve Fund through a Luxembourg intermediary to a Cayman Islands entity, Goldspire Holdings, LLC. Beneficial owner is Alara through 3 layers of nominee directors. The transfer is scheduled to execute Friday morning at 9 a.m. Atlanta time. My jaw tightened. $47 million, that was not money Dion had built. That was 30 years of margins, reinvested profits, protected reserves that I had refused to touch even during the 2008 collapse, even when every banker on the Eastern Seaboard told me I should liquidate. That money existed because I had said no over and over for 3 decades. Pull up the fund administration portal, I said. Marcus moved aside. I sat down in front of the keyboard. There is a master access credential for coal logistics that has never been entered into any digital system, never been written on any document, never been shared with any attorney or board member. It exists only in my memory. 22 characters, alphanumeric, designed by me in 1997 and never changed. Not because I forgot to change it, but because no one has ever known it needed changing. I typed it now. The screen shifted to blue. A dashboard loaded the kind of deep architecture view that the company's entire IT department didn't know existed. I was inside the founding layer of the system, completely invisible to whatever monitoring Dion had put in place. I did not cancel the transfer. Canceling the transfer would have told Dion something was wrong. Instead, I opened the destination account field and changed the routing, redirecting the $47 million from Alara's Cayman shell to the Margaret Cole Charitable Trust, a foundation registered in Georgia in 2019 under an independent board of trustees. Then I added a trigger condition. The transfer would execute not on Friday morning automatically, but only after a specific document was countersigned by Dion Cole, a document that Marcus would place on his desk in Atlanta on Friday morning, formatted as a routine quarterly financial disclosure. The moment Dion's pen touched the signature line, he would be authorizing the transfer himself, voluntarily, on the record. I leaned back and let out a breath that felt like it had been compressed inside my chest since Sunday night. How long until the Atlanta team realizes the routing was changed? I asked. They don't have access to the layer you just worked in, Marcus said. They'll see the transfer pending. They won't see the destination change until after it clears. Good. I looked at the screen for another moment. Then I closed the portal. Marcus stood at the window looking out at the harbor. When he turned back, his expression shifted just slightly. The professional composure dropped 1 careful inch. Sir, he said, are you okay? I looked at this man, 45 years old, who had sat in the chair outside my office door for 23 years and answered questions I never asked him out loud, who had placed microphones in orchid arrangements and arranged blind spot boat pickups and spent 2 years building a parallel intelligence operation inside my own company because I had asked him to and because he had understood without my needing to explain why it had to be done. My chest pulled tight. My voice, when it came out, was quieter than I intended. I will be, I said. When this is over? Marcus nodded. He turned back to the window. Outside, Nassau Harbor was lighting up in the early evening, amber and gold across the water, the kind of beautiful that almost hurts to look at when you are in the middle of something ugly. Somewhere out in that harbor, visible if you knew where to look, the white hull of the Atlantic Sovereign was moving toward the Nassau dock. Dion and Alara were on that ship, 3 kilometers away at most, close enough that if I had wanted to, I could have watched the vessel come in. I did not watch. I had other things to prepare. Because tomorrow morning, Marcus Webb was going to do something in Atlanta that he had been quietly, carefully, methodically ready to do for 23 years. And Dion Cole had absolutely no idea it was coming. That night, I slept for 4 hours. The first sleep since Margaret passed, that wasn't broken by the sound of footsteps in the hallway of the estate, or by the particular silence that follows when you realize the footsteps you heard were your own imagination filling in what grief had taken away. 4 hours, clean and dark, in a narrow bed above Nassau Harbor. I was up before 6 on Thursday, September 18th, 2025. Coffee from a machine in the hallway. Black, no sugar. I sat at the desk in the Nassau office with my satellite phone and a legal pad and watched the morning light come up over the water, while Marcus Webb was stepping into the Cole Logistics headquarters in Atlanta with a USB drive in his breast pocket. He sent me his first update at 6:47. In the building. Dion's team hasn't arrived yet. IT floor is clear until 8. I typed back, "You have 90 minutes. Take everything." And while I waited, I want to tell you about Marcus Webb. Because you cannot understand what happened next without understanding who he is and how long he has been exactly who he is. I met Marcus in the spring of 2002. He was 22 years old, a final-year student at Wharton, working part-time at a small freight brokerage in Philadelphia to cover tuition his scholarship didn't reach. His father had just lost his job at a steel plant in Pittsburgh. The family was 40 days from a foreclosure notice. Marcus wore the same blazer to every interview. I found that out later because it was the only blazer he owned. I did not offer him a job because of his resume. His resume was good, but I have seen 10,000 good resumes. I offered him a job because of what he did in an elevator in the Commerce Square building on a Tuesday afternoon in April. I had left a folder on the elevator floor. Deliberately. The folder contained a draft acquisition term sheet, the kind of document that in the wrong hands would have been worth a great deal of money to the right people. I watched from the lobby camera feed as Marcus picked it up, read the cover page, understood what he was holding, and then stood in that elevator for 40 minutes, going up and coming back down twice, waiting for whoever had dropped it to return. He did not photograph it. He did not copy it. He did not take a photograph with his phone. He just stood there holding it, waiting. That was the test I had designed. In 20 years of running a logistics empire worth billions, Marcus Webb was the only person who passed it. I introduced myself when the elevator doors opened. I offered him a position before we reached the lobby. "I don't understand," he said, looking at me with the cautious eyes of a young man who has learned that things that seem too good usually are. "You don't know anything about me." "I know the one thing that matters," I told him. 3 years later, when Dion joined the company at the age of 23, with the swaggering certainty of a man who believed he was inheriting rather than earning, I arranged for Marcus to be exactly where Dion would find him. The right desk, the right department, the right skill set, everything calibrated so that Dion would believe he had discovered Marcus himself, had recognized his talent, himself had elevated him himself. Dion spent 20 years believing Marcus Webb was his man. Marcus spent 23 years being mine. Every significant email Dion sent, every closed-door meeting, every transaction that smelled wrong. Marcus documented it, encrypted it, and delivered it to me within 24 hours. Not because I paid him exceptionally well, though I did. Because on the day I hired him, I had also arranged quietly and without fanfare for his family's mortgage to be refinanced through a subsidiary I controlled at terms that kept them in their home. Marcus never asked me about it directly. He found out 3 months after joining the company through his own research, the way intelligent people always find out the things that matter. He came to my office and stood in the doorway. "You saved my parents' house," he said. "I hired a good employee," I said. "Sit down." He sat down. And he has been sitting in that chair in one form or another for 23 years. At 7:58 on the morning of Thursday, September 18th, Marcus sent me the second update. Server access confirmed. Pulling transaction records from 2003 to present. Estimated transfer time 14 minutes. I set the phone down and pressed both hands flat against the desk. My heart was moving faster than it should have been for a man sitting still. 14 minutes. 23 years of documentation, every manipulation, every falsified report, Every quiet conversation between Dion and people who should not have been in his orbit compressed into a 14-minute data transfer. At 8:19, the third message arrived. Package delivered. FBI Atlanta Field Office received the encrypted file at 8:16. Confirmation code attached. I read it twice. My chest tightened in a way that had nothing to do with my heart condition and everything to do with the weight of what had just moved from preparation into reality. 23 years. 23 years of patience and precision, and holding every piece of this exactly where it needed to be, and it had just cleared quietly in a federal building on Peachtree Street before Dion's coffee had gone cold. The fourth message came 2 minutes later. 23 years, sir. 3 words. I read them, and my throat closed entirely. My eyes went hot, and I pressed the back of my hand against my mouth and sat there in that narrow office above Nassau Harbor while the morning light came fully through the window and turned the water gold. I typed back with both thumbs carefully because my hands were not entirely steady. Thank you, Marcus. Go home. You've earned it. I set the phone on the desk and looked out at the harbor for a long time. Down at the dock, I could see the white hull of the Atlantic Sovereign beginning its departure sequence, the mooring lines being released, the water between the hull and the pier widening by degrees. Dion and Alara were on that ship somewhere on Deck 12, eating breakfast and reviewing what they believed was their inheritance. They were heading back to Atlanta to take possession of an empire they had not built using legal instruments they believed were airtight, confident in a plan they had been constructing for 14 months. They did not know that the foundation of that plan had just been delivered to the Federal Bureau of Investigation in a 14-minute data transfer by a man they had trusted for over 2 decades. They did not know that the company waiting for them in Atlanta was no longer the company they had left 4 days ago. And they did not know that tonight I would be boarding a flight to New York to meet the one person Alara was absolutely certain was working for her. I flew from Nassau to New York on the evening of Thursday, September 18th, commercial flight, under my real name using the secondary passport that had spent the cruise inside the heel of my Oxford shoe. There was nothing to hide anymore, at least not from airport databases. The hiding was over. What came next was different. I checked into a hotel on Central Park South and spent Friday and Saturday reviewing everything Marcus had sent, cross-referencing 23 years of transaction records against the FBI confirmation codes, making sure every document chain was intact, every timestamp verified, every signature traceable. I slept better those 2 nights than I had in 3 years. Sunday evening, September 21st, 2025. 34th floor. The window faced east across the park, all black trees and amber light, and the distant geometry of the Upper East Side. I had ordered coffee for 2 and a plate of food that neither of us was going to eat. Victor Haynes walked in at 8:15 precisely. Victor was 52 years old, silver-templed, built like a man who had spent his career in rooms where winning was a matter of being the last one standing. He had been Cole Logistics' primary outside counsel for 16 years. I had trusted him with 3 acquisitions, 2 federal compliance reviews, and the drafting of Margaret's estate documents. He wore his confidence the way expensive suits wear themselves, as though it required no effort at all. He stopped when he saw me. Leland. His voice landed somewhere between relief and alarm, which told me his flight from Atlanta had given him too much time to think. You look considerably better than I expected, given— Sit down, Victor, I said. He sat. I pushed the envelope across the table without any preamble. There was no point in a preamble. Victor Haynes was a man who understood the shape of a conversation before it started, and I wanted him to understand this one immediately. He opened the envelope and took out the first photograph. It was taken on March 14th, 2025, at the Hay Adams Hotel in Washington, D.C. Victor and Alara in the hotel restaurant. A table for two, a dinner that lasted 2 hours and 40 minutes according to the timestamp. Nothing explicit. Just two people who had no professional reason to be dining together. Dining together in a city neither of them had publicly announced they were visiting. Victor's jaw tightened. A vein appeared along his temple that hadn't been visible a moment before. "Keep going," I said. He pulled out the second document. The DNA analysis run through a private laboratory in Maryland, commissioned by me in June 2025, using a sample obtained from a glass at a family dinner in April. The subject, Dion and Alara's 6-year-old son. The result. The analysis was unambiguous. Dion Cole was excluded as the biological father. The profile that remained the one that matched at the highest tier of forensic certainty belonged to Victor Haynes. The color left Victor's face so completely and so fast that for a moment I thought he was going to be sick. His hands, which had been steady on the table, pressed flat against the paper as if he needed the surface to stay upright. "Leland," his voice cracked on the single syllable, "I need you to understand that this was not something I planned." "I'm not interested in what you planned," I said, and my voice came out quieter than I expected, quieter than I felt. "I'm interested in what you're going to do next." He pulled out the third document, without being told 15 pages, summarizing a decade of his personal financial history. The quarterly retainer from Alara's family trust routed through a consulting LLC he had registered in Virginia. The payments that began in January 2019 and had totaled by August 2025 just over $800,000. Legal fees for services that no court filing had ever documented. Victor set the papers down. His breathing was audible now, shallow and controlled, the breathing of a man managing the distance between composure and collapse. "You've known all of this," he said. It was not quite a question. "Long enough," I said. "Then why?" He stopped, started again. "Why didn't you move on it sooner? Why wait until now?" "Because timing," I said, "is the difference between justice and noise. I needed every brick in place before I lit the fire." Victor looked at me across the table, really looked the way he hadn't done since he started believing that Alara's plan was the stronger hand. I watched his face move through something complicated, the calculation of a man who spent his career evaluating odds, now evaluating the odds of his own survival. "What do you need from me?" he finally asked. Something eased slightly in my chest. Not because I was surprised I had anticipated this question, had planned for this question, but because hearing it aloud meant that the last variable in a very long equation had just resolved. "Everything," I said. "Every communication between you and Alara, every instruction she gave you, every document you prepared for the competency filing, everything, Victor. In exchange, I give you your life back, your license, your reputation, your freedom. The payments disappear into a federal plea agreement that focuses its attention elsewhere." Victor's hands moved back to the papers. He looked at the photograph again, himself and Alara at the hay Adams, the candlelight, making everything look warmer than it was. "The child," he said, his voice dropping to something raw and barely controlled. "Does Dion know?" My chest pulled tight. Because underneath everything, underneath the 16 years of legal maneuvering and the $800,000 in secret payments, this was a man asking about a 6-year-old boy. And that specific pain, the pain of a question you can't take back, was something I understood in a way I wished I didn't. "No," I said. "Dion does not know. And that information will be released at the exact moment it causes the most damage to the people who deserve it, not before, not after. You have my word." Victor nodded. His eyes were glassy now, not quite crying, but close enough that the light from the window caught the moisture at the corners. He pressed 2 fingers against his mouth and stared at the table for a moment. "I'll send you everything by Tuesday," he said. "Monday," I said. He stood, straightened his jacket with both hands, the automatic gesture of a man reassembling himself, and walked toward the door. At the threshold, he stopped. turned back and looked at me the way people look at someone they have fundamentally misjudged. "You knew about Alara before the cruise, didn't you?" His voice was low and stripped of its professional polish. "You knew everything, the money, the filing, all of it before you ever stepped onto that ship." I looked back at him across the length of that quiet hotel room, with Central Park, dark and enormous, outside the window behind me. I let the question sit exactly where he had placed it. Victor Haynes nodded slowly, one single nod, the nod of a man receiving an answer that required no words, and walked out the door. I turned back to the window. The park was all shadows and amber light, beautiful in the indifferent way that New York is always beautiful when you are in the middle of something that has nothing to do with beauty. I thought about the secret I had not told Victor, had not told Marcus, had not told anyone in 34 years, a secret that existed in a single file in a lawyer's office in Boston, and in the memory of one other person who had carried it just as long as I had. Tomorrow morning, I would put on the navy vest that Margaret had given me on the 30th anniversary of Cole Logistics, and I would walk into a television studio. I booked a 6 o'clock haircut at the hotel barbershop on the morning of Monday, September 22nd, 2025. The barber was a quiet man in his 60s who worked without conversation, which suited me perfectly. I ate breakfast alone at the hotel restaurant, eggs, black coffee, wheat toast, and I put on the navy vest at 7:15 in the morning, standing in front of the full-length mirror in my hotel room. The last time I had worn it was the 30th anniversary celebration of Cole Logistics, a Saturday evening in March ballroom, full of people who had built their careers alongside mine, champagne and applause, and the particular warmth of a room full of people who are genuinely proud of something. Margaret had sat in the front row in a deep burgundy dress she had bought specifically for the occasion, and when I finished speaking, she had stood up and clapped harder than anyone else in that room. Her face lit up the way it only ever lit up when she was watching something she had believed in from the very beginning. I smoothed the lapels with both hands and looked at myself in the mirror for a long moment. My throat tightened. My eyes burned at the corners. "All right, Margaret," I said quietly to the empty room. "Let's finish this." The car arrived at 7:30. I was at the CNBC studio on 6th Avenue by 8:10, cleared security, mic'd up by 8:30. The anchor that morning was a woman in her mid-40s named Patricia Reeves. Sharp eyes, measured delivery, the kind of journalist who has conducted enough high-stakes interviews to know when a subject is performing and when they are not. She reviewed her notes while the makeup team worked and looked up at me twice with an expression that said she understood this was not a routine segment. We went live at 8:47. "Mr. Cole," Patricia began, her voice carrying the careful neutrality of someone who knows the story is already writing itself. "You were reported missing by your family 4 days ago following a medical emergency at the port of St. Thomas. Can you tell us what actually happened?" I looked directly into camera one. Not at Patricia, into the lens. Because I was not speaking to the anchor or to the studio or to the production team. I was speaking to every board member, every institutional investor, every federal regulator, and every journalist who would be watching this clip on a loop before the hour was out. "I was not missing," I said. "I was left." There is a significant legal distinction between those two words, and the Federal Bureau of Investigation is currently in the process of understanding it very clearly. Patricia leaned forward slightly. "Can you elaborate on the circumstances?" "On the morning of September 17th, I was deliberately abandoned at the port of Charlotte Amalie St. Thomas, which for those unfamiliar with U.S. geography is American territory, by my son Dion Cole and his wife Alara Cole. They removed my primary identification, my financial instruments, and a prescription bottle bearing my cardiac medication label. The intention, based on documented communications I have since recovered, was for me to be stranded without resources and without recourse. The studio was very quiet. The kind of quiet that happens when everyone in a room has stopped breathing at the same time. As of 9 o'clock this morning, I continued, I am invoking the Founder Protection Clause embedded in Coal Logistics' original Articles of Incorporation, a clause that has never been triggered in 31 years of operation because it has never been necessary until today. All financial transactions associated with the company are frozen pending federal review. All signing authority previously granted to Dion Cole is suspended effective immediately. Mr. Cole, Patricia's voice had lost some of its professional neutrality. You're naming your own son on live television. I am naming two individuals who on the morning of September 17th committed elder abandonment on United States territorial soil, and who have in the months preceding that date engaged in coordinated financial fraud against a company I built over 31 years. I let each word land separately, the way you set down something heavy and breakable. Dion Cole, Elara Cole, those names are now part of a federal record. What I knew and what I am telling you now is what was happening simultaneously in Atlanta while I was speaking those words on live television. Marcus had sent me the footage 2 hours later. In the 30th floor conference room of Coal Logistics headquarters, Dion was standing at the head of the table with 7 senior directors running through what he was calling a transition brief. A junior director named Holloway had the wall-mounted television on in the background, volume low, CNBC running. At 8:49, Holloway's hand shot up and pointed at the screen. Every head in the room turned. Dion saw his father's face completely composed, completely lucid, looking into a camera, with the calm authority of a man who has never once in his life doubted where his power resided. The color drained from Dion's face so fast that the director sitting beside him actually reached out a hand instinctively, as though preparing to catch someone about to fall. "Turn it up," Dion said. His voice came out wrong, too thin, too high. The voice of a 20-year-old who has just realized the test he thought he had already passed has not even started yet. Holloway turned it up. They listened to me read his name. Slowly, clearly, before a global audience. Elara, who had been standing near the window, pressed one hand flat against the glass. Her knuckles went white. She said nothing, but her jaw worked in the way that jaws work when the thing you want to say cannot be said in a room full of witnesses. 7 minutes after I finished speaking, Marcus confirmed every corporate credit card registered to Dion Cole, and Elara Cole was declined simultaneously. A junior account manager at their Atlanta bank branch called Dion's cell phone to notify him of an automated freeze. Dion did not answer. He was calling Victor Haynes. Victor did not pick up. Victor had sent me everything by Monday morning as requested and was currently in conversation with a federal public defender in Midtown Manhattan. After the cameras cut, Patricia Reeves leaned across the anchor desk with her microphone still live and asked me off script, the question coming from somewhere more human than professional. "Mr. Cole, are you okay?" I looked at her. And for the first time in more days than I could count without my chest hurting, I smiled. A real smile. The kind that reaches the eyes and means what it looks like it means. "I've been okay," I said, since the moment they left me on that dock. They just didn't know it yet. I left the CNBC studio at 9:15 and was on a flight back to Atlanta before 10. Below me, somewhere in that city, Dion was making calls that no one was answering. The empire he had spent 14 months reaching for was dissolving at the molecular level, and he didn't yet understand why every door he tried was already locked from the inside. Tonight, I would walk into the federal prosecutor's office with a file that had taken 2 years to assemble, and with something that Dion and Elara had handed me themselves without ever realizing they had done so. I landed in Atlanta at 2 in the morning on Tuesday, September 23, 2025. The terminal was near empty at that hour, just the hum of floor polishing machines and the particular exhausted silence of airports between midnight and dawn. I did not call anyone. I did not want to be met. did not want a driver, did not want any hand extended in my direction that I would have to manage. I rented a car from the Hertz counter, a plain gray sedan, the kind that disappears in traffic, and drove north through the city toward the federal building on Spring Street. I parked in the structure across the street at 2:45 and sat in the car with the engine off, watching the building's lights until the sky began to lighten somewhere around 5:30. At 6:15 I walked in. The federal prosecutor assigned to the case was a woman named Dana Whitfield, 48 years old, 20 years in the U.S. Attorney's Office. The kind of person who has heard every version of every story and has developed a precise clinical interest in the specific version that happens to be true. She met me in the lobby with a paper cup of coffee and the brisk, evaluating handshake of someone who had read the FBI intake file and had a great many questions. "Mr. Cole," she said, guiding me toward the conference room, "your case was flagged to my office Friday morning when the data package from your associate arrived. I've had people reviewing it through the weekend." "And," I said, "and I have a significant number of questions," she said, starting with the living will. I set my briefcase on the conference table and opened it. The documents inside were arranged in the order I had decided on during the drive from Nassau, not chronologically, but architecturally. The way you build an argument, not a timeline. 5 years ago, I said, in September 2020, I executed a living will with an embedded protective clause. It was drafted by an independent firm in Boston, not Victor Haynes, not anyone connected to the Cole Logistics legal team. It was notarized, registered with the Fulton County Probate Court, and a sealed copy was filed with the Federal District Court here in Atlanta. I slid the document across the table. Dana Whitfield picked it up and read the relevant section without rushing. The clause specifies, I continued, that if any physician not included on a pre-approved list of 3 specialists, all of whom I selected personally, and who have agreed to the terms, signs any document declaring me mentally incapacitated, 3 automatic responses are triggered. First, full executive authority transfers immediately to an independent trust board, bypassing all internal corporate hierarchy. Second, the signing physician's credentials and the circumstances of the assessment are flagged automatically to the FDA's Office of Criminal Investigations and the FBI's Healthcare Fraud Unit. Third, all financial transactions linked to my son's name are frozen for 72 hours pending review. Dana looked up from the document. Her expression had not changed, but something behind her eyes had sharpened considerably. Your son used a Dr. Philip Hartman, she said. Hartman is not on my approved list, I said. He has also received payments from a medical consulting firm that Alara Cole controls through a Virginia LLC. I have documentation of 6 transfers over 18 months, totaling $94,000. Dana set the living will down. She reached for her legal pad. When did the clause trigger? She asked. 9 o'clock in the morning on Saturday, September 21st, 2025, I said. 48 hours after Hartman signed the assessment. 12 hours before I appeared on CNBC. She paused. Her pen hovered over the pad for a moment. So when your son walked into that company Monday morning believing he had legal authority, he had no authority, I said. The trust board assumed control automatically at 9 Saturday morning. Every action Dion took after that point, every document he signed, every instruction he issued, was issued by a private citizen with no standing. The fraud compound accordingly. My voice was steady. My hands were flat on the table. But inside my chest, something was pulling tight, in a way that had nothing to do with the legal argument, because this was my son I was describing. My son, who I had held as an infant in the maternity ward at Savannah Memorial on a cold Tuesday morning in 1982, who had fallen asleep in my arms in the car on the way home, who had looked up at me with Margaret's eyes and a face so new and so open that I had sat in the hospital parking lot for 20 minutes because I was not ready to drive while feeling what I was feeling. I breathed through it. There is more, I said. I laid out the remaining documents one at a time. The $47 million transfer order destination changed trigger condition. Attach the document Dion would be asked to sign. 23 years of transaction data from Marcus Webb. The footage from the estate and from the ship cabin. The DNA analysis. Victor Haynes's signed cooperation agreement, delivered to me Sunday night. And at the bottom of the stack, the notarized statement of Dr. Evelyn Cross, retired federal judge Second Circuit, who had been standing on the pier at St. Thomas at 9:45 in the morning on September 17th, and had watched the entire event with the trained attention of someone who spent 30 years deciding what constitutes evidence. Dana Whitfield read for 11 minutes without speaking. Her associate, a young man seated to her left, stopped writing and simply read over her shoulder. When she looked up, her voice was careful and precise. "Mr. Cole, we'll need a grand jury." "I know," I said. "I've been prepared for that since 2023. At that moment, my phone vibrated on the table. Security system alert from the Cole estate, motion detected, interior east wing. I tapped the notification and the live feed opened. Dion standing in my study, pulling books off the shelves, with both hands, his face twisted with a desperation that looked almost unrecognizable on someone who had been so composed 4 days ago on that ship deck. He reached behind the third shelf and found the wall panel, found it, because he knew it was there, because at some point, Ilara had done enough reconnaissance to know where my safe was located. He pressed his palm against the electronic keypad. His hand was shaking visibly, shaking so badly that he missed the first digit twice. I tapped 4 digits on my phone remotely. The safe locked down completely, the keypad going dark. Simultaneously, the estate's internal camera system switched to evidence capture mode, maximum resolution redundant, backup to 3 off-site servers. Dion slammed both palms against the safe door and made a sound, not words, just a raw, wrecked sound that came from somewhere below language. The cameras recorded every frame of it. I set the phone face down on the conference table. "Additional footage will be available by end of day," I told Dana Whitfield. I left the federal building at 11 in the morning. North of the city, Dion was standing in front of a locked safe he could not open in a house that was no longer operating under his authority, in a city where every door that mattered had been sealed from the inside before he even landed at Hartsfield-Jackson. And at the headquarters, Ilara was doing exactly what I had known she would do the moment she felt the ground shifting beneath her. She was signing documents, moving fast, trying to get signatures on paper before the freeze became total. She did not know that every document she was signing had already been rerouted, that her signature in this moment was not power. It was a confession. Before I show you the moment Dion signed his own destruction, without reading a single line of what he was signing, I need to know you are still with me. You are still with. Drop the number 9 in the comments right now. Just that. 9. So I know who stayed. Because what happens next is the kind of thing that makes you realize some traps are not built in a day. Some traps take 2 years and 1 signature to close. A quick note before we continue: the story ahead carries fictional elements crafted for narrative depth. The situations are constructed, but if this kind of storytelling is not for you, this is a natural place to step away. No judgment. For everyone staying, let's keep going. Let me take you back to Friday, September 19th, 2025. Because while I was moving through Nassau and New York executing the pieces of a plan 2 years in the making, Atlanta was running a completely different story. The story Dion and Ilara believed they were writing. Marcus sent me the footage in real time. I watched it between meetings, between flights, between the quiet moments when there was nothing to do but wait. I want you to see it the way I saw it. Because to understand how completely they destroyed themselves, you need to watch them do it at the absolute peak of their confidence. 9:15 in the morning, September 19th. Dion walked into the Cole Logistics boardroom and sat down in my chair. He rolled it back from the table, settled into it, spread both hands flat on the glass surface, and the expression on his face was the expression of a man who has just realized he is exactly where he always believed he was supposed to be. He looked around the room at the senior directors filing in, and he smiled. "Gentlemen," he said, "and ladies, thank you for coming in on short notice. As of this morning, I'm assuming interim operational authority over coal logistics. My father suffered a medical episode during our voyage and is currently unreachable. We're not going to let that slow this company down for a single day." Garrison, 22 years with coal, a man who had driven 3 hours through a Georgia snowstorm to attend Margaret's funeral, raised his hand slowly. Dion Section 14 of the Corporate Charter requires verified medical documentation before any emergency succession can be recognized. Has the board been provided with? "The documentation is in process," Dion said, cutting him off with a wave of his hand so casual it was almost insulting. "Garrison, I've known you my whole life. Are you really going to let bureaucratic paperwork stand between this company and operational continuity?" "It's not bureaucratic paperwork," Garrison said, his jaw set. "It's the legal framework your father built to protect this company from exactly the kind of situation." "Garrison!" Dion's voice dropped into something harder. "Sit down." Garrison looked at him for a long moment. Then he looked at Alara, who was seated to Dion's right, watching the exchange with the attentive patience of someone taking notes without a pen. Garrison sat down. But I could see in the footage, in the specific way he folded his hands on the table, that he was remembering every word of this conversation. By 11 o'clock, Dion had signed 17 documents. He fired Garrison first, along with 2 other senior directors who had worked directly under me for over a decade. He announced it with a kind of cheerful finality, like a man cleaning out a closet. "Effective today," he told them, "your positions are being restructured. We appreciate your service." Garrison stood up slowly. His eyes found Dion's. "Your father is going to walk back through that door," he said quietly. "And when he does, every person in this room is going to have to answer for what happened today. My father," Dion said, leaning back in my chair, "is a 70-year-old man who got confused on a dock in the Caribbean. He's not walking back through anything." Garrison picked up his jacket from the chairback, folded it over his arm, and walked out without another word. The door closed behind him. Alara watched him go. Then she slid a document across the table to Dion. "The vendor contracts," she said. "Sign these before the morning session ends." Dion picked up the pen. All of them," she said. "Today. What I want you to understand, what Dion had absolutely no way of knowing as his pen moved across those signature lines, is what those contracts actually represented. 6 months before we ever boarded that ship, I had engaged an independent restructuring firm in Boston to quietly and legally reorganize the entire asset architecture of coal logistics. Every asset of genuine value, the real estate portfolio, the logistics patents, the long-term carrier contracts that generated 80% of actual revenue, had been transferred into the Margaret Coal Charitable Trust, a separate legal entity, an independent board, untouchable by any coal family member acting unilaterally. What remained in the coal logistics operating entity was a legally intact corporate shell carrying the following 3 years of federal tax obligations from transactions Dion had approved without proper disclosure. A $240 million bank loan secured against shares now worth a fraction of their pledged value, and 17 supplier contracts with penalty clauses that triggered automatically upon change of controlling ownership. Dion was not sitting on a throne. He was sitting on a pressure mine that I had spent 6 months loading one document at a time. At 2:47 that Friday afternoon, Marcus placed the final document on Dion's desk, formatted as a routine quarterly financial disclosure, dense with figures. The kind of report that gets signed with the confident impatience of someone who believes they already understand what they're looking at. Dion picked up the pen without reading past the first page. "What is this one?" he asked. "Q3 financial disclosure," Marcus said, his voice perfectly even. Standard board requirement. Fine. Dion signed it. He didn't look up. Thank you, sir, Marcus said. The moment that signature completed $47 million, moved quietly, instantaneously, irreversibly out of the pending transfer queue and into the Margaret Cole Charitable Trust. Dion's phone buzzed 30 seconds later with a banking notification. He glanced at it, frowned at the figure, and set the phone face down. Elara, he called across the office. Did you approve an internal transfer this afternoon? Elara looked up from her laptop. Which one? Something just hit the platform. 47. It's the reserve reallocation we discussed, she said smoothly without missing a beat. Internal, ignore it. He ignored it. That evening I watched through the estate security cameras as Dion and Elara sat in Margaret's dining room, beneath her chandelier. The one she chose herself, the one that made even the hardest conversations look soft and warm and survivable. Dion raised his champagne flute. Elara touched her glass to his. They were flushed and easy and genuinely happy in the way people are happy when they believe they have finally arrived somewhere they have been trying to reach their entire lives. To Cole Logistics, Dion said. To what it's about to become, Elara answered. I watched them drink. Then I closed the application. It was time to step out of the dark. On the morning of Tuesday, September 23rd, 2025, I drove myself to Cole Logistics headquarters and arrived at 6:40 before the day shift, before the lights on 30 were fully lit, before anyone who needed to perform composure had time to practice it. Derek, the lobby officer, who had worked the early shift for 4 years, looked up from his desk and went completely still. Mr. Cole. His voice came out barely above a whisper. Sir, we weren't, nobody told us. Good morning, Derek, I said. I'll be in my office. I took the regular elevator, made coffee on the credenza, sat in my own chair and waited. At 8:52, the security feed showed Dion's car entering the underground garage. At 9:03, Elara's. At 9:07, Dion came through the lobby doors, moving fast, jaw forward, shoulders rigid, the body language of a man who had spent the night converting fear into momentum and was hoping it held long enough to matter. He went straight for the VIP elevator, swiped his keycard. The light went red. Excuse me. He turned to the security desk. Patrice, 11 years with the company, met his eyes steadily. My card isn't reading. Override it. Mr. Cole, your access credentials were suspended at 9:01 this morning, per a federal hold notification. I don't have the authority to... I don't care what notification you're showing, Dion said, his voice rising fast and hard. I am the acting CEO of this company. Override the card. Sir, I cannot override a federal hold. That would require... Then get me IT on the phone right now. IT has already been flagged, sir. There. Get them on the phone, Patrice, now. Elara stepped in front of him and pressed one hand flat on the security desk, her voice low and precise. The voice she uses when she is trying to prevent a situation from becoming a scene. Patrice, she said, connect us with your IT director personally, not the general line. We'll wait. Yes, ma'am, Patrice said and picked up the phone. While she dialed, Dion pulled out his phone and called his bank directly. He paced 2 steps left, 2 steps right, the tight circuit of a man in a space that has suddenly become too small. This is Dion Cole. I need to know why I'm showing a freeze on accounts 7741 and 3890. Mr. Cole, I'm showing a federal investigation hold on both accounts effective 9:01 this morning. All outbound transactions are suspended. You'll need to contact your legal. I'm calling my attorney right now, Dion said and hung up. He called Victor Haynes. 4 rings. Voicemail. Called again. Voicemail. A third time, a generic automated message. The sound of a phone disconnected from its owner. Dion lowered his phone slowly. His face went the particular gray-white that skin goes when blood has retreated somewhere more vital than the surface. He pressed his knuckles hard against his mouth, and breathed through his nose, controlled, desperate, a man trying to keep the walls of something from coming all the way down. Ilara. His voice cracked at the edges. Victor's not. I know, she said already on her own phone, one hand pressed flat against her sternum, like she was trying to hold something together from the outside. She ended the call, and the color left her face in a single wave. The broker. The margin. Dion. How much? 12 million. The number came out stripped of everything else. 24 hours. His knees went soft. Both hands grabbed the edge of the security desk, knuckles bone white against the counter. The share value dropped 80% after CNBC. Ilara said, her voice shaking, the first time I had ever seen Ilara Cole unable to control her own voice. The margin call triggered automatically. Victor is gone, Dion. What do you mean gone? I mean he has not been our lawyer for longer than we thought, she said, and her lips pressed together so hard they went white. Something broke in Dion's face right then. Not gradually, all at once. His chin trembled, his eyes filled so fast it looked involuntary. The way eyes fill when the body overrides the mind's instruction to hold steady. He made a sound with no language in it. Just raw, scraped open grief and fury, and the annihilating humiliation of a man who has understood too late that he was never ahead. Not once. Not for a single moment. That was when I opened the door at the end of the hallway. I stepped out, coffee in hand, silver hair combed back. I stood at the far end of that corridor and looked at my son across 30 years and everything we had never said to each other in time for it to matter. Dion looked up. You were never there, were you? His voice came out wrecked hollow. The dock, the terminal, none of it was real. No, I said, none of it was real. You planned all of it. Not a question. A reckoning. Every day, I said quietly, for 2 years. His legs gave out. He went down slowly, both hands finding the floor, head dropping forward, and the sound that came from his chest was the sound of something enormous and irreversible finally hitting the ground. My eyes burned. My throat closed. I stood there and felt something I was completely unprepared for. Not victory, not relief, but the grief of a father watching a child arrive at the consequence that love offered differently and earlier might have prevented. I turned and walked back into my office, closed the door, because there was still one thing that mattered more than anything that had happened today. A secret I had carried for 34 years, and the person it belonged to was waiting. There are truths a father never wants to know. Not because knowing them changes what has already happened, but because once you know, you cannot unknow. And everything you look at afterward carries the weight of what you are carrying. I learned this truth in April of this year. 5 months before the cruise, I spent 2 weeks deciding what to do with it. Then I made my decision, wait for the right moment. Let the truth become a weapon only when the moment arrives, that it can do the least damage to the innocent and the most damage to the guilty. I am telling you this part of the story from Laurel Grove Cemetery in Savannah, Georgia. It was a Wednesday morning, September 24th, 2025, 2 days after I stood at the end of that hallway and watched my son go down. I drove down from Atlanta the night before, checked into a hotel I had stayed in with Margaret 30 years ago, and went to the cemetery at 7 in the morning before the heat came up. Margaret's grave is under a live oak that drops Spanish moss across the headstone in the afternoon. I sat on the iron bench beside it and put my hand on the granite and talked to her the way I have been talking to her since November 2022. There's something I haven't told anyone yet, I said. Not Marcus, not Victor, not Dana Whitfield. I need to tell you first. The morning was very still. Spanish moss moved in something that was barely a breeze. The boy isn't Dion's, I said. My throat tightened so fast, I had to stop and breathe through it. My eyes went hot, and I pressed the back of my hand against my mouth and sat there for a moment, with that sentence hanging in the air between me and the granite. Let me tell you how I found out. In April, the boy 6 years old, Ilara's son, the child I had held at the hospital the morning he was born, and who had Margaret's habit of reaching for your face with both hands when he wanted your attention, came to stay at the estate for a weekend, while Dion and Ilara were in Chicago. My personal physician, Dr. Raymond Foster, was visiting for my own quarterly check-in and happened to review the boy's recent medical file, which Ilara had left with the housekeeper in case of emergency. Dr. Foster came to find me in the study. "Leland," he said carefully, standing in the doorway with the file in both hands. "There's something in these blood work results that doesn't add up against what I know of your family's medical history. I could be wrong, but I think you need to look at this." I looked at it, and then I said, "Raymond, I need you to arrange a discrete DNA analysis, full paternity panel, and I need this to stay between you and me until I tell you otherwise." Dr. Foster looked at me for a long moment. "Leland, are you sure you want to?" "I'm sure," I said. "How long will it take?" 10 days, he said. Maybe 12. It took 11. The result came back on a Tuesday afternoon in late April. I read the summary paragraph once. Then I set the paper face down on my desk and looked out the window at the Savannah River for a very long time. The child's paternal DNA matched no Cole family profile. It matched at a 99.7% confidence level 1 Victor Haynes. I sat at Margaret's grave that Wednesday morning in September and told her what the paper had said. I told her slowly in full sentences the way you tell someone something when you need to hear yourself saying it out loud to know that it is real. "The thing that hurts me," I said, and my voice broke on the word, "hurts in a way I had not been expecting, is not Ilara. Ilara I can understand. I never trusted her, not fully, not from the beginning. The thing that breaks me open is that boy. 6 years old. He doesn't know anything. He hasn't done a single thing wrong in his entire life. And he is going to grow up carrying a truth that nobody in his family had the decency to protect him from." I pressed both palms flat against the granite and let the coldness of it move into my hands. "I almost told Dion in May," I continued. I picked up the phone twice. Both times I put it back down. Because if I had told him before the legal structure was in place, Ilara would have used the boy as a bargaining chip. She would have threatened custody, threatened the child's stability, threatened everything, and the case against her would have fractured. The boy would have been weaponized. I couldn't let that happen. So I did the only thing I could do that felt like protection without exposure. In May 2025, through a Boston law firm with no connection to Cole Logistics, I established a private charitable trust with an independent board capitalized at $2 million, structured to fund the child's education, healthcare, and basic welfare, regardless of what happened to either of his parents. The child does not know the trust exists. He does not need to. It will be there when he needs it. "He came to find me the morning we left for the ship," I told Margaret. My voice had gone very quiet. "I was in the front hallway, putting on my jacket, and I heard him running down the stairs, that sound he makes 2 feet hitting each step together, because he still hasn't figured out alternating his feet. And he came around the corner and grabbed both my legs and said, 'Pop, Pop, where are you going?' I stopped. My eyes were full. I did not try to stop it. Sitting beside Margaret's grave is the one place where I have never tried to stop anything. I crouched down," I said. I looked at him, and he looked back at me with those eyes. "Margaret, he has your eyes, the same color, the same way of looking straight at a person without any guile in it whatsoever." And I said, "I'm going on a short trip. When I come back, things will be better." He had nodded very seriously, the way 6-year-olds nod when they decide to believe something. Then he had hugged me around the neck, and I had held him for a moment longer than I meant to, and then I had stood up and walked out the door. I sat at Margaret's grave, And let the tears come not dramatically, not with any sound, just the quiet overflow of a man who has been holding something very heavy for a very long time and has finally found the one place where he is allowed to set it down. The boy will be all right, I finally said, pressing my hand against the stone. I've made sure of that. Whatever the courts decide about Alara and Dion and Victor, the boy will have what he needs. That's the one thing in all of this I am certain of. A mockingbird landed on the top of Margaret's headstone, looked at me sideways for a moment, and then flew away into the oak. I stayed until 10 o'clock. Then I drove back to Atlanta, because the following week, Victor Haynes would sit in a witness chair, and the truth that I had been carrying since April would finally leave my hands and enter the record where it would do what truths do when they are finally spoken in rooms designed specifically for that purpose. It would land on everyone in that courtroom with the full weight of what it actually was, and the person it would land on hardest was the one who had built the most elaborate structure to keep it hidden. October arrived in Atlanta the way justice sometimes arrives, slowly, visibly, with a weight that everyone can feel before it formally declares itself. The federal grand jury convened on the 3rd of October, 2025, and sat for 17 days across 3 weeks. I was not permitted in the room. That is how grand juries work. They are the system examining the evidence before the trial begins, and the subject and his representatives wait outside while that examination happens. I waited well. I have had a great deal of practice. Dana Whitfield called me every 2 days with procedural updates delivered in the careful, calibrated language of a federal prosecutor who knows the difference between what she can say and what she cannot. "Mr. Cole," she said, "on the morning of October 7th, I want you to understand that what's happening in that room right now is working exactly the way we built it to work. Every document chain is holding. Every timestamp is verified. The Marcus Webb data package alone would have been sufficient for indictment. What you have in addition to that is, I have to be honest with you, more comprehensive than anything I have taken into a grand jury proceeding in 20 years. "And Dr. Cross?" I asked. "Dr. Cross," Dana said, and I could hear something in her voice that prosecutors rarely allow genuine satisfaction, is the reason their entire defense strategy has already collapsed before the trial begins. Their attorney has filed 3 motions to exclude her testimony. We have defeated all 3. A retired federal judge of the Second Circuit, with no financial relationship to you, who was physically present and voluntarily documented what she witnessed, there is no legal argument that makes that testimony disappear. "Good," I said. Their new lead attorney, a man named Forsyth, very expensive, very theatrical, has been arguing to the press that this entire case is a coordinated retaliation campaign orchestrated by you against your own son. That the evidence was manufactured, the witnesses were coached, and that the real victim in this case is Dion Cole. I exhaled slowly. "And the grand jury," Dana said, "is looking at 23 years of documented transactions, 8 separate instances of Alara accessing your medication, without authorization, footage of the saint. Thomas abandonment, a signed cooperation agreement from Victor Haynes, and the notarized testimony of a federal judge. Forsyth's narrative requires them to believe that you spent 2 years manufacturing all of that evidence in advance of a crime you provoked your own son into committing." She paused. "I don't think they find that persuasive." She was right. On October 21st, 2025, the grand jury returned a true bill of indictment on 3 counts. Count 1, corporate financial fraud, relating to the attempted $47 million wire transfer, and the 3 years of undisclosed related party transactions. Count 2, conspiracy to commit elder financial abuse, a federal felony under the Elder Justice Act, relating to the coordinated attempt to have me declared incompetent and strip me of assets. Count 3, falsification of medical records, relating to Dr. Hartman's paid assessment. Dana called me at 4:17 in the afternoon. "It's done," she said. "All 3 counts. Arraignment is set for the 29th. I was sitting in my office at the Coal Logistics headquarters, the room that had been unlocked and returned to me the week after the Independent Trust Board assumed operational control. My desk, my window, the Atlanta skyline in the amber light of an October afternoon. The same view I had looked at for 31 years while making decisions that built something from nothing. "Thank you, Dana," I said. "Mr. Cole, I want to ask you something, and you don't have to answer." Her voice shifted into something more personal, the register she uses when she is speaking as a human being rather than as an officer of the court. "In 20 years, I've prosecuted fraud cases involving strangers, business partners, competitors. I've never prosecuted a case where the primary defendant is the prosecutor's own child. Are you holding up?" My chest tightened. My hand pressed flat on the desk. "I'll answer that honestly," I said. "No, not entirely, but I'm holding." "That's enough," she said. "The trial date is set for November 10th. After she hung up, I stayed at the window for a long time. The skyline was doing what Atlanta skylines do in October, going gold and then copper, and then a deep, complicated purple as the light changed. I had watched that transition from this window more times than I could count. It had never looked the same twice. I had spent 2 years building every piece of what had just become a federal indictment. I had calculated, prepared, waited, moved, and executed with a precision that had required everything I had. And now it was in the hands of a jury, a judge, a system I had trusted to do what systems are built to do when they are fed the truth clearly and completely. I did not feel triumphant. I felt the specific exhaustion of a person who has completed a task that was necessary and terrible, and that no one who loved their family should ever have to do. Meanwhile, beyond the window, Dion and Alara were coming apart at the seams in ways that were being documented by their own attorneys in discovery filings. Forsyth had requested a joint defense agreement. Alara's separate counsel, she had hired her own lawyer, 2 weeks after arraignment, had declined. The lifeboat had one too many people in it, and both of them knew it. Their marriage, I was told by Dana, was functionally over. They were communicating only through attorneys. Alara had moved out of the Cole estate after the eviction notice issued under my authority, executed by my property attorney, had been formally served and enforced. Dion was staying in a rented apartment in Midtown, living on whatever credit remained from accounts that hadn't been touched by the federal freeze. The man who had raised a champagne glass in Margaret's dining room on a Friday evening and said, "to what it's about to become," was now negotiating a plea deal through a public defender because Forsyth's retainer had run out. "You did this to us," Dion had apparently said to Alara in their last direct conversation, according to a statement filed in the divorce proceedings. "You signed everything," Alara had said back. "Every single document. Your pen, your hand, your name. Neither of them was wrong." That was the particular, precise architecture of what had happened. 2 people who had each been fully responsible, blaming each other for the consequences of their own choices. I had 3 weeks before the trial began. And in those 3 weeks, there was one meeting I needed to have, one I had arranged before I ever stepped onto the Atlantic Sovereign, with the one person who knew the full truth of what I had actually been protecting all along. The person I arranged to meet before I ever stepped onto the Atlantic Sovereign was not a lawyer, not a federal agent, not anyone whose name appeared in any Coal Logistics filing or board record of any kind. She was 34 years old. She held a doctorate in systems engineering from MIT. She ran a logistics optimization firm in Boston, quiet without fanfare, that had grown into one of the most sophisticated freight analytics operations on the Eastern Seaboard. Her name was Naomi Reeves, and she was my daughter. I want to tell you that slowly. It took me 34 years to say it aloud, and you deserve to hear it at the pace it actually carries. I met Naomi's mother, Claire Reeves, in the summer of 1990. I was 35. Coal Logistics was 7 years old and consuming every hour I had. Margaret and I had been married for 12 years, and were not at that time in a good place. I am not going to dress what happened in comfortable language. I made a choice. I have lived with it every single day since. Claire called me in November of that year. She was pregnant. She wanted nothing from me except one thing she wanted me to know. She was not going to tell Margaret. She was not going to pursue any legal claim. She had family in Boston, a job she was good at, and a life she intended to build on her own terms. She asked only that if she ever needed to reach me, the door would be open. I said yes, and I meant it. Naomi was born in April 1991. I kept a private line of communication open through a Boston law firm for 34 years, twice a year a brief letter. Once a year a birthday card with a note saying only that I was aware of her and glad she existed. When Naomi was 22, she wrote back. One page. Very precise. She had known who I was since she was 16. She had spent 6 years deciding what to do with that information. She wanted to meet me, but on one condition. She wanted to be evaluated as a professional, not welcomed as a daughter. She would not accept anything given on the basis of blood alone. I read that letter 4 times. Then I wrote back, name the terms. I will meet them. We met in Boston in October 2013. A coffee shop near her university. She sat across from me with a legal pad and spent the first 40 minutes asking questions about Cole Logistics' operational architecture that most of my senior directors could not have answered. She was not nervous. She was not emotional. She was precise, intelligent, and entirely herself. At the end, she set the pen down and looked at me. You built something real, she said. The question I've been asking myself for 6 years is whether the right person is going to inherit it. And, I said, she held a thought behind her face before releasing it the same way I do, the same dark brown eyes. I think you know the answer, she said, or you wouldn't be sitting here. In September 2023, when I first understood the full shape of what Dion and Alara were building, I called Naomi and told her everything. I need to ask you something. I have no right to ask, I said. I want to designate you as primary beneficiary of the Margaret Cole Charitable Trust and operational successor of Cole Logistics. Legally, with full disclosure. But it means your name enters the public record. 34 years of privacy gone. My throat tightened around every word. I won't do it unless you say yes. A long pause, not the pause of someone deciding, the pause of someone who had already decided and was choosing how to say it. I've been ready for 3 years, Naomi said. I was waiting for you to be ready. I pressed my hand over my eyes and sat in the dark of my study, feeling something move through my chest I could not have named. She flew into Hartsfield Jackson on Tuesday, October 28th, 2025. I picked her up myself, no driver, no assistant. She came through the sliding doors, pulling one carry-on bag, navy blazer, reading glasses pushed up on her head. When she saw me, she stopped walking for just a moment. Then she walked forward and held out her hand. Mr. Cole, she said. I held it a moment longer than a handshake requires. My eyes burned. Thank you for coming, I said. I've been waiting 34 years. A warmth lived beneath the dry surface of her voice, the way certain people hold emotion close to the body out of direct view. I think I can manage the drive from the airport, I laughed. The first real laugh in longer than I could calculate from somewhere I thought had closed permanently. We drove north through Atlanta on the morning of Tuesday, October 28th, 2025, through traffic that moved with the particular logic of stop and surge and stop again. Naomi sat in the passenger seat with the window cracked 2 inches, watching the skyline the way someone studies a place for years and finally sees it in person. Tell me what you see, I said. She didn't answer immediately. She considered everything seriously. It was one of the first things I had noticed about her in 2013. A city that grew faster than its infrastructure, she said. The logistics backbone has been improvised rather than designed. Coal Logistics has been operating inside those inefficiencies for 30 years. She glanced at me. The first thing I would do is commission a full network audit and redesign the regional hub structure from scratch. 2 years. Significant capital outlay. Roughly 30% improvement in per-unit margin within 48 months. The warmth moved through my chest unchallenged. I've been waiting for someone to say exactly that for 12 years, I said. I know, she said. I've read every annual report. We reached the coal estate at 10:40. I unlocked the front door and we stepped inside. Naomi stopped in the entrance hall, looked up at the original plasterwork, the ceiling Margaret had spent 3 months selecting from architectural salvage catalogs. Then at the painting on the landing, $400 in 1989 from a young artist in Savannah. She had excellent taste, Naomi said. My throat tightened hard. She did. Tell me about her. No one had asked me that in a very long time. I stood in my wife's house and I told my daughter about Margaret. The crossword puzzles, the Sunday morning, humming the way she clapped harder than anyone else in a room when she believed in what she was watching. My voice broke near the end. I let it break. Naomi listened without moving. When I finished, she said, "She sounds like the kind of person who makes everyone around her better without them realizing she's doing it." That's exactly what she was, I said. We sat at Margaret's kitchen table, and I laid out the remaining pieces. The trial beginning November 10th. Victor's testimony. Dr. Cross's notarized statement. The DNA evidence introduced as supporting documentation for the conspiracy charge. And at the end of all of it, Naomi's formal designation as successor. Walk me through the trust structure, she said, pulling a legal pad from her bag. I walked her through it. The Margaret Cole Charitable Trust as the primary asset vehicle. The independent board as governance. The succession clause written in 2023 that named Naomi Reeves, by full legal name, as designated operational successor of Coal Logistics upon resolution of all pending proceedings. She took notes in precise, tight handwriting. Then she set the pen down. One question, she said. Ask it. Do you want me to be your daughter in public? She said. Or do you want me to be the successor? Because those are two different conversations, and they require two different kinds of courage from both of us. My eyes stung. My chest ached in a way that had nothing to do with any medical condition. I want both, I said. My voice came out rough and completely honest. I should have asked properly a long time ago. I'm asking now. Something moved across her face, starting controlled, then softening rapidly into something younger and far less defended. Her eyes went bright. She pressed her lips together and looked at the ceiling for a moment. Both, she said finally. We do both. I reached across the table and put my hand over hers. She turned her palm up and held mine. October light came through Margaret's window and made everything look briefly the way things look when something broken begins slowly at great cost to mend. The trial starts in 13 days, I said. I know, she said. I'll be there. The question was always whether you were ready. I squeezed her hand once. I am now. She squeezed back, then uncapped her pen. Now, tell me about the Southeastern distribution model. It's been bothering me for 3 years. I laughed. The same laugh as the airport from somewhere I thought had closed permanently. And for the first time in this entire terrible, necessary story, I felt something that was not strategy, not grief, not exhaustion. I felt what it might be like to look forward. On the morning of Tuesday, November 11th, 2025, the second day of the trial, I arrived at the federal courthouse on Spring Street 40 minutes early. Not from anxiety. I had not been anxious since the morning I sat in the St. Thomas terminal with a paper cup of water and counted 25 minutes with the patience of a man who has already done everything that can be done. I arrived early because I wanted to see their faces before they had time to arrange them. They came in at 8:51. Dion, first gray-faced suit pressed badly, the suit of a man whose housekeeper was no longer his housekeeper. He moved to the defense table with the stiff mechanical stride of someone running entirely on will, because everything underneath the will has already quit. Ilara followed 2 steps behind, spine straight, chin level, every wall rebuilt brick by brick through the night. She found my eyes across the room. She held them for 3 full seconds. Then she sat down and turned away. Dana Whitfield leaned toward me and said quietly, "Dr. Cross arrives at 9:15. Watch the defense side when she's introduced." "I intend to," I said. At 9:17, the door opened. Dr. Evelyn Cross walked in, 67 years old, silver-haired, charcoal vest over a white blouse, clothes that make no statement because they have nothing to prove. She moved to the witness stand with the unhurried, grounded step of a woman who has spent 35 years being the most authoritative presence in every room she entered. She did not glance at Dion or Ilara. She assessed the bench, took her seat, and waited. Forsyth. Dion's lead attorney, expensive and theatrical. The man who had built his entire defense around the word retaliation, studied her with the mild expression of someone who has not yet located the threat. Dana stood. "The prosecution calls Dr. Evelyn Cross, retired Associate Justice of the United States Court of Appeals for the First Circuit. 35 years on the federal bench, specializing in elder financial abuse and corporate fraud. She retired in June 2022. She has no financial, personal, or prior relationship with Leland Cole. The two met for the first time aboard the Atlantic Sovereign on September 15, 2025. I watched Forsyth's face shift. The mild assessment hardened into something considerably less comfortable. I watched Dion go white. Not the gray-white of financial collapse I had seen 3 weeks ago in the lobby. This was different. This was the white of a man remembering with sudden and nauseating precision a specific conversation on an open ship deck that he had believed no one was close enough to hear. Dana turned to Dr. Cross. "Judge Cross, can you describe what you witnessed on the morning of September 17th at the port of Charlotte Amalie St. Thomas?" "I was on the 14th deck port side at approximately 9:40. Dr. Cross said, her voice carrying the measured clarity of someone who has delivered verdicts for 3 decades and has never needed volume to command a room. "The ship had begun its departure. I observed a man on the pier, later identified as Leland Cole, standing at the dock's edge. He was not running. He was not waving. He was completely still." "And did you observe anyone aboard the ship in relation to Mr. Cole?" "A man on the 12th deck," she said, holding a leather briefcase raised toward the pier. Deliberate, sustained. The man was smiling. "Did you overhear any conversation from the 12th deck?" Dr. Cross opened her notes. She read without inflection, which made the words land harder than any dramatic delivery could have managed. "I heard a male voice say, 'Leave him there. An old man with no ID, no money, no medication. He'll be dead from hunger or a heart attack before he even realizes he's lost everything. This will all read as a tragic travel accident.'" Dion's hands pressed flat against the defense table, pushing down, as though the surface was the only solid thing left in his world. His jaw ground with the visible grinding effort of a man managing the physical symptoms of terror. Ilara's fingers curled inward in her lap, 4 nails cutting 4 small crescents into her own palm, the only mechanism she had left for keeping her face from showing what was happening behind it. Forsyth rose for cross-examination. "Judge Cross, you had no reason to monitor the 12th deck before September 17th, correct?" "I had no reason beyond the one every person has for paying attention to their surroundings," Dr. Cross said. "I heard a man say his father should be left to die on a dock. I spent 35 years adjudicating elder abuse cases. I paid attention," Forsyth pressed. "Can you confirm Leland Cole did not arrange your presence on that ship?" Dr. Cross looked at him with the expression of someone who has evaluated a great many arguments and formed a clear opinion of their quality. "I booked my cabin in March of 2025, she said, "through a travel agency in Providence, Rhode Island, on my personal credit card, for reasons entirely unrelated to the Cole family. You are welcome to subpoena those records." Forsyth sat down. Dana stood one final time. Judge Cross, based on your direct observation on September 17th, would you describe Leland Cole's behavior as consistent with cognitive decline? Dr. Cross looked across the courtroom. Her eyes found mine for exactly 1 second. What I witnessed, she said, was not a man losing his mind. It was a man watching his son make the worst decision of his life. She gave me the same single nod she had given me on the ship deck, the nod of a person who made a commitment and has kept it to the letter. Victor Haynes walked into the courtroom at 2 o'clock on the afternoon of November 11th, 2025. He wore a gray vest, the same shade as the one he had worn in the hotel room in New York 7 weeks earlier. I wondered if that was deliberate, if he had chosen it as a private marker, a reminder of the night he made the only decision that could still save what remained of his life. He looked older than he had in New York. 7 weeks of federal cooperation proceedings will do that to a man. He walked to the witness stand, without once glancing at the defense table, sat down, and folded his hands in his lap with the careful, controlled stillness of someone managing a tremor they do not want the room to see. Dana Whitfield stood. Mr. Haynes, you served as outside counsel for Cole Logistics for 16 years. Is that correct? That is correct, Victor said. And in that capacity, were you approached by Alara Cole in January of this year with a specific legal request? Victor exhaled once through his nose, a slow, deliberate breath, the kind you take before you step off something high. Yes. Can you describe the nature of that request? She asked me. Victor said, his voice flat and worn smooth by weeks of repetition. To design a legal framework for removing Leland Cole from operational authority over Cole Logistics. Specifically, to structure a sequence of events resulting in a court-recognized declaration of mental incapacity. Forsyth was on his feet instantly. Objection, Your Honor, hearsay. Mr. Haynes is a direct participant in the alleged conspiracy, Dana said. This is first-hand testimony of his own conduct. Overruled, the judge said. Continue. The first element was abandonment, Victor said. Leland Cole was to be left at a port without identification or financial resources. The St. Thomas port was selected because he stopped for half a second, jaw tightening. Because it was believed to be outside U.S. legal jurisdiction. That assumption was incorrect. The air in the courtroom shifted, 20 people quietly recalibrating something they had not fully understood until this moment. The second element was a medical assessment. A physician, Dr. Philip Hartman, was retained and compensated through an entity I structured to certify cognitive impairment. Were those payments disclosed to any regulatory body? No, Victor said. They were not. And the third element, Victor's palms pressed together, an involuntary bracing motion, the body doing what the mind is trying to hold steady. $47 million, he said, from the Cole Logistics Emergency Reserve Fund to a Cayman Islands entity, Goldspire Holdings, LLC. I designed the corporate structure. The beneficial owner, through 3 layers of nominee directorship, was Alara Cole. Alara had not moved throughout any of it. She sat straight-backed, hands folded, eyes moving between Victor's face and the judge's bench, with the cold precision of someone calculating in real time exactly how much damage is still containable. Each time Victor named a figure or a date, her jaw tightened by 1 visible degree, the only crack in the surface she could not fully seal. Dion beside her was a different country entirely. His face had gone gray when the session opened. As Victor spoke, it went grayer, and then at the mention of $47 million, something behind his eyes gave way. The specific shift of a man confirming the fear he had been carrying and desperately hoping was wrong. He turned and looked at Alara. She did not look back at him. She won't look at you, Dion said barely above a breath, but the courtroom was quiet enough to carry it to every corner. His voice cracked on the final word with the raw, exposed sound of a man whose last working belief has just been taken from him. His attorney gripped his arm. Dion pressed his mouth shut and stared at the table. Victor walked through 3 more instances, emails, wire transfers, signed documents, each one locking into the evidentiary record like a beam finding its joint. Then he stopped. He looked down at his hands on the stand. One long breath. "Mr. Haynes," Dana said, "do you have additional information to provide pursuant to your cooperation agreement?" "Yes." Victor reached into his jacket and placed a sealed envelope on the railing. "I do." Dana carried it to the bench. The judge opened it, read the single page inside, read it twice, and looked up. "This is admissible. You may proceed, Mr. Haynes." Victor looked out at the courtroom. Every layer of professional composure had stripped away until what remained was simply a man who had made too many wrong choices across too many years, now naming them out loud in a room built for exactly that purpose. "What I am about to read," he said, "is the result of a DNA analysis conducted on April 14th of this year on a sample obtained from a minor child, the 6-year-old son of Dion and Alara Cole. The sound Alara made was not a word. It was a sharp, involuntary intake of breath, someone touching something unexpectedly hot. She was on her feet before Victor finished the sentence, her chair scraping back and tipping sideways, hitting the floor with a crack that rang the full length of the courtroom. "Objection." Forsyth was standing, his theatrical composure gone for the first time in 2 days. "Your Honor, the relevance." "The paternity of the child," Dana said, cutting clean across him, "is directly material to the nature and motivation of the conspiracy charged in Count 2. The gavel came down twice, sharp, final. "Counsel will approach. 30-minute recess." I did not move. Around me the room shifted and murmured. I looked down at my own hands flat on the gallery railing, completely still. The hands of a man who had carried one particular truth for 7 months and was now finally setting it down. In the 30 minutes that followed, Dion and Alara sat in the defendant waiting room. They did not exchange a single word. 30 centimeters apart on the same bench, 2 people who had built a life, a conspiracy, and a family together, close enough to touch, and as far apart as 2 human beings can be. The 3rd day of the trial began on the morning of Wednesday, November 12, 2025, with the particular heaviness of a room full of people who already know what is coming, but must sit and watch it arrive anyway. Victor Haynes returned to the witness stand at 9:05. He looked like a man who had not slept, which was accurate, and like a man who had made his peace with that which was also accurate. He sat down, folded his hands, and looked at Dana Whitfield with the steady, emptied expression of someone who has given everything they have to give and is here only to finish the giving. "Mr. Haynes," Dana said, "yesterday you were in the process of introducing a DNA analysis. Please proceed." Victor picked up the single page from the stand in front of him. He cleared his throat once. "The analysis was conducted on April 14th of this year," he said, "by a certified private laboratory in Bethesda, Maryland. The sample was obtained from a minor child, the 6-year-old son of Dion and Alara Cole, and compared against reference profiles for both Dion Cole and myself." He paused for one breath. "The result confirmed at a 99.7% confidence level that Dion Cole is not the biological father of the child. The biological father is identified as Victor Haynes." He set the paper down. He did not look up. The courtroom absorbed the sentence the way rooms absorb things that are too large for the available space, with a kind of compressed, vibrating stillness. Dion did not react immediately. He stared at the page in Victor's hands with the expression of a man reading text in a language he almost knows, working through it, word by word, each word landing a half-second after the one before it. Then his face broke. Not dramatically, not with a shout or a sudden movement. It broke the way old wood breaks along a grain from the inside outward, in a split that was always going to be there once the pressure became sufficient. His chin caved first. His eyes filled so fast and so completely that the tears were already moving before he had processed what was happening to him. He pressed one hand over his mouth and made a sound that had no language in it, the raw animal sound of a man losing something he did not know he was about to lose. He turned to look at Alara. Alara looked back at him. Her face was a closed door. Her eyes were dry. And in the specific quality of her expression, the absence of apology, the absence of explanation, the complete and absolute blankness of a woman who has already moved past this moment to calculating the next one. I watched Dion understand the full architecture of what had been built around him. "Say something," he said to her. His voice came out broken and barely above a whisper. "Alara, say something." Alara turned her face forward and looked at the bench. Dion's attorney grabbed his arm as he lurched upward from his chair. The chair catching the back of his knees, tipping, hitting the floor with a crack that rang through the room. He pointed one shaking hand at Victor, his finger trembling so badly it moved in small arcs, and his mouth opened and nothing came out. Just breath. Just the desperate drowning man effort of someone trying to form words that no longer exist in any version of the world he currently occupies. The judge's gavel came down twice. "Mr. Cole, sit down or I will have you removed." The bailiff moved. Dion's attorney pulled him back into his chair. Dion sat caved forward over the table, both hands over his face, his shoulders moving in the way shoulders move when a person is fighting with everything they have to keep from collapsing completely in public. Alara sat straight. She stared forward. She did not look at her husband once. I watched all of it from the gallery. My hands were flat on my knees. My chest ached in a way that had moved entirely beyond the legal and entirely into something older and heavier, the grief of a father watching his son receive a truth he had no capacity to survive cleanly. I did not feel victorious. I felt the specific bone-deep exhaustion of a person who has carried a very heavy thing for a very long time and has finally set it down and discovered that the setting down does not feel like relief. It just feels like the absence of the weight, which is different. After order was restored and Victor stepped down, the defense attorney rose. "Your Honor," he said, "we request adjournment until tomorrow morning for consultation with our clients." The judge looked at the defense table, at Dion, who was staring at the wood grain in front of him, at Alara, who was looking at nothing. "Granted," the judge said. "Court resumes December 5th for sentencing." I was the last one to leave the gallery. I stood at the window for a moment. Atlanta in November, gray and copper and complicated. I thought about a rusted pickup truck in 1974. I thought about Margaret's crossword puzzles and Sunday morning coffee. I thought about Naomi with her navy blazer and her legal pad, and the way she had said both, with her voice not entirely steady. All of it had led here, and all of it was waiting on the other side. At 11 o'clock that night, Dana Whitfield called. "They're taking the plea," she said. "Both of them. Sentencing December 5th. I sat in the dark for a long time after I hung up. Not from sadness. Not from anything that needed a name. Just sitting. Just being in the dark without needing to do anything about it. Sentencing day arrived on a Friday morning, December 5th, 2025. Cold and clear. The kind of Atlanta winter morning that has no softness in it, just light and air, and the absolute transparency of a sky with nothing left to conceal. I wore a black vest. The first time in my life I had worn black not for someone else's ending, but for one that I had constructed myself, and that knowledge sat in my chest, with a weight that was neither pride nor regret, but something more complicated than either. The courtroom was full. I took my seat and waited. At 10:15, the judge entered. At 10:22, he read the sentence. Dion Cole, 18 years federal custody. Financial penalty of $23 million. Full forfeiture of all assets acquired through the identified fraud period. Dion sat with his eyes on the table in front of him. He did not look up. He had nothing left to defend, nothing left to calculate, nothing left to perform. He just sat in the wreckage of everything he had tried to build, and the sentence landed on him the way sentences land on people who have already been broken, as confirmation rather than revelation. Ilara Cole, 15 years federal custody, financial penalty of $12 million. Ilara received it without blinking, without moving, right up until the moment the bailiff stepped toward her with the handcuffs. Then her hands began to shake. Not a tremble, a visible, uncontrolled shaking, the kind that starts in the fingers and moves up through the wrists. She pressed both palms flat on the table to stop it. It didn't stop. The bailiff secured the first cuff, and the sound of it closing made her flinch in a way that every composed, calculating, controlled thing she had ever projected could not absorb. Her eyes went bright. Not with tears, with the raw, terrified brightness of someone who has just understood for the very first time that all the walls they built were not walls at all. I looked at her for one moment. Then I looked away. Dana touched my arm gently. "Mr. Cole, the judge has offered you the floor if you want it." I stood up. I looked around the courtroom, the press, the gallery, the court officers, the empty chairs where Dion and Ilara had sat. I took one breath. "Cole Logistics was built by two people," I said. "Myself and my late wife, Margaret. Every contract, every margin, every mile of freight, it was built for something. Not for a family name, not for inheritance. For something she believed in, that I believed in, that is still worth believing in." I paused. Today it will be returned to what it was always meant to be. I turned toward the back of the courtroom and gave a single nod. Naomi Reeves stood up from the last row of the gallery. She walked forward through the center aisle, 34 years old, navy blazer, the dark leather portfolio she carried everywhere tucked under one arm, her chin level and her step unhurried. The press turned. Camera shutters fired. People leaned toward each other. The room tilted toward her the way rooms tilt toward people who are exactly where they are supposed to be. She stopped beside me. I looked at my daughter, at Margaret's eyes, in a face I had watched grow from a photograph in an envelope, to a woman who had spent 6 years building something real on her own terms, before she ever agreed to stand beside me in public. And I said in a voice that was not entirely steady, but did not need to be, "She has her mother's eyes, and she has earned every single thing I am about to give her." Naomi looked at me. Her jaw was set with the careful control of someone managing something large. Her eyes were bright and full and absolutely steady. She gave me one nod, clean, direct, exactly the way she had nodded in the kitchen in October when she said both. That was enough. That afternoon, I drove alone to Savannah. I stopped at Laurel Grove Cemetery in the long gold light of a December afternoon. And I laid sunflowers on Margaret's grave, sunflowers, because she said once years ago that they were the most honest flowers, because they always turn toward the light, no matter how dark it gets around them. I sat on the grass with my back against the live oak, and I talked to her. Not like a man reporting results, like a husband who has been away far too long and has finally come home. "Naomi has a Navy portfolio," I told her. "She takes notes on everything. She's already planning to rebuild the hub structure, the whole southeastern distribution network. She's going to do it better than I did." My throat tightened. My eyes burned, and I let them burn. "She has your eyes, Margaret. The exact color. The way they go straight at a person without any pretense. I should have told you about her. I should have told you a long time ago. I'm sorry I didn't." The oak moved above me. Spanish moss drifting. The light going gold and then copper. "I think I'm ready to stop fighting now," I said. "I think I'm finally ready to just live." On January 5th, 2026, I boarded a ship at the port of Savannah, the city where I started with a rusted 1974 pickup truck and a vision that everyone around me called reckless. The ship was headed south. The morning was cold and bright, the harbor moving with the slow, patient energy of a port that has been receiving and releasing things for centuries and will continue doing so long after every person currently standing on its docks is gone. I stood at the railing on the upper deck and looked out at the water. Behind me on the pier, Naomi Reeves stood with her hands in her coat pockets, watching the ship move. She had driven down from Atlanta that morning without being asked. She did not wave. She did not call out. She just stood there, the person who was carrying what I was leaving behind, and watched me go the way you watch someone when you understand that letting them leave is its own form of love. I did not look back. For the first time in 70 years, I stood at a railing on a ship, moving away from a shore, and I felt nothing pulling me backward. No unfinished business, no debt unpaid, no weight that needed carrying, just the water, just the light, just the horizon doing what horizons do, sitting at the exact distance where everything you cannot yet see begins. I started this story in a small souvenir shop at a port in St. Thomas, holding a wooden music box, listening to a ship's horn sound. I am ending it on a different ship looking at a different horizon. Between those two moments is everything I have told you. The music box is on the dresser in my cabin. Every morning on the water, I wind the key twice and let it play. 8 notes repeating. The melody Margaret hummed in the kitchen on Sunday mornings, low and private, like something she was keeping only for herself. It is enough. It has always been enough. I just needed to find my way back to it. I am 70 years old. I have built an empire lost. A wife watched my sons choose betrayal over legacy, and found a daughter I kept hidden for 34 years out of a cowardice I dressed up as protection. If this family story has taught me anything, it is that the things we refuse to say out loud do not disappear. They grow. They compound. They become the very crises we spend decades trying to prevent. I am not proud of every choice I made. A wiser man, a man who trusted God sooner and his own pride less, might have spoken the truth to his sons earlier, and the reckoning might never have been necessary at all. But I am the man I am shaped by the roads I chose to walk. So here is what I will tell you plainly from a man who has lived this grandpa stories from the inside. Do not wait. Do not store your love in locked drawers and call it strategy. Do not let silence become the loudest thing in your house. These grandpa stories will not all end the way mine did, with enough time, enough resources, enough Marcus Webbs willing to wait 23 years. Most people do not get that. Most families do not survive what mine almost didn't. This is a grandpa stories about legacy. But legacy is not what you leave in a boardroom. It is what you leave inside the people who keep your name after you are gone. This family story is also a mirror. Look into it carefully. If any part of this family story stirred something in you, a memory, a question, something you have been carrying too long, leave it in the comments below. Share this story with someone who needs to hear it. And if you want to follow where this journey goes next, the button is right there. Thank you truly for staying until the very last word. And one last thing before you go, the stories ahead contain fictional elements built with one purpose only: to make you think, feel, and perhaps see your own life a little more clearly. If that is not what you are looking for today, there is no shame in stepping away and finding what serves you better. But if you are staying, I promise it will be worth it.